President Trump's legal team plans to file a major lawsuit in Georgia tomorrow. They believe they have enough evidence of fraud for Trump to win that state and others. And it's the anniversary today of President Abraham Lincoln's famous Gettysburg Address, delivered November 19, 1863. What lessons can we learn today from his enduring Civil War speech? So today, President Trump's legal team, led by lawyers Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell, delivered what they characterized as their opening statement to the American people of the case they intend to make of widespread fraud in multiple states. And that includes at least Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Arizona. They say they have more than double the votes needed to overturn this election in terms of provable illegal ballots. And the former New York Mayor Giuliani also said that tomorrow the team would be filing a major lawsuit in Georgia. To discuss these developments, tonight we have with us Jason Shepard, chairman of the Cobb County Republican Party in Georgia, and Garland Favrito, co-founder of the nonpartisan Voters GA, a vote integrity watchdog organization. Gentlemen, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having us back so soon. You must really like us.
Well, you know, all eyes are on Georgia, as we were talking about the other day. You know, you're the focal point, so you might as well enjoy the spotlight. Garland, maybe you can start by updating us on where things are at in Georgia with the audit and what comes next.
Yeah, so the counties are wrapping up their results. They had a few problems. A few of the straggler counties had a few problems in terms of technical issues, maybe lost memory cards, but they're all pretty much wrapping up, and we're expecting the Secretary of State to certify tomorrow. I don't think it's going to change the results, but it will probably reduce the margin somewhat.
And then what comes next?
Well, once the certification takes place, I would expect that the president is going to ask for a recount. And at that point in time, we'll be able to challenge the ballots, as I understand, from Georgia law. So that will be an interesting process with the ballot challenging going on while the recount's going on.
So, yeah, we are expecting a lawsuit tomorrow. Maybe let's just play that clip about what Rudy Giuliani said today.
Mm-hmm. In the city of Atlanta, Republicans were not allowed to watch the absentee mail-in ballot process. Inspections completely cast aside. And we have numerous double voters. We have numerous out-of-state voters. And we have specific evidence of intimidation and changes of vote. That'll all be in the lawsuit that comes out tomorrow.
So we just heard there's a series of allegations there, which elsewhere in the press conference, Giuliani also said was basically common across all the states that I listed earlier. So he thinks there's, you know, some more widespread or at least systemic fraud going on. But let's just talk about what he said about Georgia. So he says, you know, Republicans weren't allowed to watch the count of the mail-in ballots and a lot of double voters and out-of-state voters, as well as intimidation. Can you tell us anything about that, Jason?
Sure, Cindy. I mean, to overturn a Georgia election, you basically have to find enough voters to make up the margin of difference between the two candidates, plus a formula that includes all the people, all the voters who turned out and voted in that election, even if that vote was a blank ballot or someone wrote in. So what Giuliani and the president's legal team are doing is a very smart strategy, and that is they're going after and disqualifying voters. Because if you disqualify enough voters to make that difference, to meet that threshold in the number of votes, then you can actually have a new election called for. And that's really the remedy that we're probably looking for here in the state of Georgia, is a brand new election. Now, obviously, time is tight. The presidential electors in the Electoral College meet on December 14th, so we must have a result by then. So in addition to lawsuits, obviously the president's going to be asking for a recount. Also, I expect that Senator David Perdue and Commissioner Lauren McDonald, the Public Service Commissioner, who's also in a statewide runoff because he fell below that threshold of 50% plus one, will also be looking for a recount. Hopefully the votes that have been found in this audit, especially in Floyd County and Fayette County and a couple of others, will actually give Senator Perdue and Commissioner McDonald that margin of victory to actually avoid a runoff, and it'd be a lot easier going into January 5th, just having to fight for Kelly Loeffler.
Right. So it looks like the margin right now is just under 13,000 votes that Biden is ahead of Trump at this stage. They found about 1,000 votes. I think Biden got 28 more votes in one of the found memory cards in Douglas County, and then 3 other counties it went more to President Trump. It seems to me like, from hearing everything, that kind of the major issue was observing the count of the mail-in ballots, because that's where the issue with the signatures, they separated the envelopes that had the signatures on it. Garland, can you tell us more about that? Is that seem like that's the heart of the issue here?
Well, yeah, Rudy didn't exactly mention that, but I think there's 2 things that concern me. One was he said that the Republicans were not allowed to watch the signature matching process. That would be a grave concern if that's the case. I wasn't aware of that. So that's really very, very disturbing. The other thing that you're alluding to, Cindy, is there are invalid ballots as well, and perhaps he's not aware of that yet. Based on our own research, there appear to be a lot of invalid ballots. So I think that's going to be it could be a major factor, order of magnitude, more than the margin itself. For example, as I mentioned before, I think the other night, I witnessed the results going up 20,000 votes for Joe Biden, and then yet at the same time, President Trump's votes went down 1,000 in Fulton County. At least that's what it appeared to me. So, and I watch them all the time. So there could be a substantial amount, in tens of thousands of votes of invalid ballots, and that's another thing that I didn't quite hear him say in that one clip.
Right. Yeah. In that one clip, he didn't talk about it. He was mostly focused on the lack of observation and the invalid votes. And Sidney Powell was talking mostly about the Dominion voting machines and the flipping, as you mentioned, potential flipping of votes, and also the fact that those voting machines are, they were sent to other countries in Germany, whatever, where the actual counting was happening, and they have ties to the Venezuelan socialist regime. So these were, in terms of those kind of inconsistencies, what they were focused on.
Yeah, that's right. Just to add to that, Cindy, real quick, there is evidence that there is the Dominion machines may not have counted correctly, but it's not conclusive evidence at this time.
Right, and Giuliani was talking about, just like Jason, Giuliani was talking about, even if that counted, if they're counting invalid ballots, well, then who cares? They counted the same on election night and counted the same now. It's still an invalid ballot. But Jason, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that Rudy Giuliani's evidence is right. I mean, in Cobb County, we appointed, as chairman of the county party, part of my job is to appoint poll watchers and election observers. And there was no consideration for monitoring the absentee ballot process and the signature match. So we had no idea how those signatures were being matched. I mean, we're told there's a process and a procedure to do it where the signature is verified by a system called eNet, but still very much a human process. Someone who looks at the ballot, they look at the signature on the elector's oath and look at it versus what's on the computer screen. In this election, there's been a lot of talk about a consent agreement agreed to by the Secretary of State's office that allowed a voter to kind of what's called cure the ballots. In other words, if there was a signature mismatch, instead of rejecting that ballot outright, the Board of Elections had to call that voter and give them a couple of days to come in with a photo ID and prove that that ballot was theirs and the signature was theirs. So once again, though, we had no one in the process looking to make sure that those signatures were being verified. And that's a big flaw in the system. I think it's a flaw that the Democrats are able to exploit.
And what was the result of the audit in Cobb County? And is Cobb County more Republican, Democratic? What happened there?
Well, we're a county in transition. We've long been a Republican stronghold in the state of Georgia. However, most of the growth in the county over the last 10 years have been new Democratic voters moving in. They've moved in because we have the lowest taxes in the Atlanta metro area. We have the best jobs, the best school system. Unfortunately, they're bringing their own old voting habits and changing county government to what they left. We're well known as the home of Newt Gingrich, but now the county is kind of purple. In fact, in this election, we had a split result. We were the only core metro Atlanta county in the suburbs not to lose a single state legislative seat when we were some of the most targeted state legislators in the entire state. But the Democrats took control of almost every county office countywide. So, we're red trending to purple and blue, which is unfortunate because once again, we're a great place to live, and the Democrats want to live here too. The problem is they just don't want to give up their old Democratic voting ways. So the result in Cobb County between the paper ballots that were counted and the machine results was 0.09%. The Secretary of State's office had basically allowed a deviation of, I believe, 0.3%. So obviously 0.09 is well below it. It's about 400 ballots off of what the machine count had been. So for us, we consider the Cobb County audit successful. Of course, we're still dealing with a majority Republican Cobb County Board of Elections. So at least for now, we have Republicans in control of the election system in Cobb County. And I think the results speak for themselves.
Although Giuliani did mention that there is an affidavit from observers in Cobb County. So I'm not sure if that relates to not getting proper access. That's might be what it's.
I think there's a few others. The monitors and volunteers that I appointed did notice some discrepancies, even in Cobb County, and they filed affidavits with the Trump legal team to kind of add those to the mix of problems that we've seen across the state of Georgia. I'm glad we're a county where we don't have dozens of affidavits filed, but even here in Cobb County, there were some discrepancies that need to be brought to light and are evidence in the case that there has been some voter fraud and some concern about ballot integrity.
And Garland, is your organization going to be inserting itself in this process at all, or do you have a role to play in what goes forward now?
Well, yeah, we've organized literally hundreds of volunteers that we can activate in a moment's notice for almost any task, such as we had a lot of them out for poll monitoring. So if there was a need for ballot validators or something like that, since we have a massive number of ballots we're looking for, we're glad to supply as many volunteers. They're all anxious and active and ready to get involved.
Has there been any discussion for now that the audit is done and there's going to be a recount discussion about how things will be conducted differently from how they've been up until now to ensure more integrity? Is there any discussion about that?
Just for the recount, or?
Yeah, correct.
Well, so the recount will operate differently. So there won't be a full manual hand count. It will just simply rescan the barcodes, which is basically meaningless because it just reprints the previous unverifiable results. But the fact that we've had the hand count is a good thing, although the way it was reported up with entering the data into the Secretary of State system instead of the county systems is a concern. But that would be the main difference. And of course, the primary thing here is that it opens the door for legal challenges of the ballots and some of the things that the president's attorney was talking about. So that will kind of drag out the recount process to some degree, but probably for a good reason, that we want all the legal votes to count and not the illegal votes.
I mean, it sounds like from counsel that they just want their day in court to present. They're convinced they have enough evidence to get enough votes thrown out, and they just want their day in court to be able to present the evidence to the court, to the American people. So I guess we'll be still keeping a close eye on Georgia. We actually have to wrap up here, so we'll be chatting again, I'm sure, and we'll certainly be keeping an eye on Georgia. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
And coming up after the break, what can President Lincoln's Gettysburg Address teach us over a century and a half later?
I want to it comes down to bills, it takes a while to get into effect. But when it comes down to executive orders, it's a fast impact.
Well, I guess economy-wise, a lot, depending on what they give, if they're going to tax everything to hell and back.
A lot. I mean, jobs, just a lot.
That's a tough question. I think local politics matter more than general politics.
That's a great question, because me personally, it doesn't necessarily affect me because I'm not obsessed with government and that.
I think for the last 4 years, I lived in this country for almost 40 years, and the last 4 years was one of my greatest life living in the United States.
0.
I think in general, the incoming president is going to be more responsive to things that I care about, and I think it'd be more fair be more governing of the entire country rather than just a small segment of supporters.
I'm severely concerned what Biden's going to do as far as moving our country significantly to the left, the progressive point of view. I don't think that's what America wants.
77 years ago today, President Abraham Lincoln delivered his brief yet powerful Gettysburg Address. It was at the dedication of the National Cemetery at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where roughly 7,000 American soldiers between Union and Confederate armies died just months earlier in one of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War. Tonight, we're joined by John Cribb, an ardent admirer of the rail splitter and author of Old Abe, a novel. John, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me, Cindy.
So instead of a biography, you took a novel approach, literally. So perhaps you can paint for us the scene of Lincoln's famous Gettysburg Address. Give us a sense of the time and place.
Well, he gave it on November 19th, today, in 1863. And the purpose of his speech was to help dedicate a cemetery for the fallen Union soldiers at the Battle of Gettysburg, which had taken place 4.5 months earlier at the battle, which was the most horrific battle that the country had seen up to that point. And so he traveled up there, and he was invited to come help dedicate the cemetery and to give a few appropriate remarks. The invitation said he was not the main speaker. The main speaker was a fellow named Edward Everett, and Everett Everett spoke for 2 hours, and then Lincoln stood up and spoke for a couple of minutes. But that was his purpose, was to help dedicate that cemetery, because they were still in the process of burying the thousands and thousands of soldiers who had been killed at that terrible battle.
And so what was his main message? What was he trying to convey to the nation at that time?
Well, he wanted to, the country was very, very war weary at that point. This war had been going on, dragging on, and with no end in sight. And he wanted to tell the northern people why they needed to go keep fighting for this during this war. And so he basically redefined the war from a battle to save the Union to a battle to both save the Union and free millions of enslaved Americans. And not only that, he redefined it as a fight to rededicate the nation to the founding principles in the Declaration of Independence, which was why he started out 77 years ago. That's 87 years if you subtract that from 1863 when he gave the speech. That gets you back to 1776, which was, of course, the date of the Declaration of Independence.
So today we know that this speech is, one of the most famous and enduring in history. How was it received at the time?
It was generally received well. When he first gave it, for a second there, he thought maybe it wasn't, because it was so quick that the crowd didn't realize that he was done when he finished. And he sat down, and his good friend Ward Hill Lamon said that later that Lincoln said to him, "Lamon, that speech won't scour." That was a reference, it was a farming reference. A good plow would scour the land, and a bad one wouldn't. But then there was a thunderous applause afterwards. And then in the coming days, the reception was very good, and America quickly realized this was a great speech. It wasn't universally praised. The press was very partisan back then, as it is today, maybe more so. And the Democratic papers, Lincoln was Republicans, the Democratic papers didn't like it too much. The Chicago Times said that the cheek of every American should tingle with shame at the dishwatery, flat utterances of the president. and the London Times panned it. But on the other hand, the Republican newspapers like the Springfield Republican paper in Massachusetts said that it was a perfect gem of a speech. And it did not take long for the nation to realize this was a truly great address.
So we didn't have television or social media then. Was it printed and proliferated? How did the nation get word of it?
Yeah, it was newspapers. That was the high-tech mass media of the time, was those newspapers. And Lincoln was a genius at using those newspapers. And one reason the speech was short, not the only reason, but one reason it was short, because he knew if it was short, it's just 272 words, that it could be printed in full in newspapers across the country. And so they did that.
Wow, perfect soundbite. Steve.
Yeah, exactly.
So these days it's arguably the most divided the nation has been since the Civil War. Do you see any lessons that we can learn from Gettysburg Speech or that time in general that'll help us today?
Yeah, 2 or 3 lessons. Number one, we should remember that we have been divided before and have made it through those times. So this is not the first time we've been divided, and we'll get through this again. I think another lesson is that Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address really was calling on Americans to rededicate themselves to those principles in the Declaration of Independence, our founding principles that we're all created equal and we all have the right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And he knew that that is the glue that holds us together as Americans. And if we're faithful to those principles, we will be, one nation and one people. And then finally, Lincoln was always calling for unity. He started out his presidency in the first inaugural address saying to both North and South, he said, we must not be enemies, we are friends. He said, though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. And his second inaugural address, he reminded Americans that we must act with malice toward none, with charity for all. And by charity, he meant that old-fashioned, biblical meaning of charity, brotherly love for all. So Lincoln was all about the Union. He was all about unity. And I think if we listen to that message, we'll be okay even in these divided times today.
And so the cemetery was dedicated to the fallen soldiers from both armies?
No, it was Union, the Union officers. The Southerners, some of them were interred there on the battlefield, but they basically wanted their soldiers to come home. So it was really the cemetery was a national cemetery, was really a cooperation between several northern states to bury the Union dead.
And so the war ended not too long after his speech. Can you share with us, characterize for us, what were things like after the Civil War? Did that bring unity? Was there a tough period?
Yeah, it took a while. Reconstruction was a tough period because there were people in the North that wanted revenge and wanted basically to see the South on its knees. There were people in the South who wanted to basically go back to the way things were before. And I think if Lincoln had lived, it might have possibly been an easier time, but Reconstruction was a tough time, and it took a long time to get over that war, and as we know, it took a long time to fully, restore and give full civil rights to people. So it's a long process, and we're still in some ways, going through that today.
Yeah, really, it's not that long ago. I was just thinking, as a 17 years, it still doesn't, 150 years, like you can see the lineage. So it does feel relevant today.
It does. I love that. The way you put that too. That was great.
Did the calculation.
Yeah.
What else do you think are Lincoln's biggest legacies?
Well, I think his biggest legacy is, number one, standing up for those defining American principles. Lincoln's favorite founding document was the Declaration of Independence, and so that's what he went to again and again. That we are all endowed by our Creator with those rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and we are all born equal. And Lincoln's message in the Gettysburg Address is that America is the country that, it was the first country created in history, in the history of the world, on those ideals. And the world, ever since from the beginning, pretty much of history, the vast majority of human beings had lived without those principles, without those propositions, as Lincoln put it. And so the eyes of the world were on this nation. And Lincoln, in the Gettysburg Address, was saying that's one reason we have to keep fighting this war, is because if the country fails, if it fractures, if the Union falls apart, the hopes of freedom of people around the world are going to be dealt a severe blow. So that's what Lincoln was all about. And Lincoln knew that each generation had to stand up for those principles. And so we have to keep doing that today.
The last great hope of Earth, right? He said.
Right, exactly, yeah.
I want to touch on one other thing from your book, and which I really enjoyed reading. It's almost Thanksgiving now, and not only did Lincoln proclaim Thanksgiving Day, but he also pardoned the first turkey. I really enjoyed reading that part. Maybe you can just share that story with us.
It's a great story, isn't it? Yeah, someone sent a turkey to the White House to be fattened up for a holiday feast, and it was Lincoln's youngest son, Tad, made friends with this turkey, named him Jack. And people would look out the White House windows and see Jack following Tad, across the lawn of the White House. And one day Lincoln was in a cabinet meeting, and Tad came bursting through the doors with tears in his eyes, and he said, "Papa, they're going to kill Jack. You've got to stop them." And Lincoln tried to explain that Jack, had been sent to the White House to be eaten, but Tad said, "But he's a good turkey. We can't kill him. You have to stop them." So Lincoln took a piece of White House stationery, and he scribbled out a note that said, "The turkey Jack is pardoned, and his life is to be spared." And he gave it to Tad. And Tad went scampering off to save his friend from the butcher block. So Lincoln became the first president to pardon a turkey. Harry Truman revived that custom years later in 1947. He gave the first official White House pardon to a turkey, and ever since then, presidents have pardoned a turkey for Thanksgiving.
So why did Truman give the hat tip to Lincoln on that? What prompted him to do it?
I don't know. I'm not sure, but he did. And actually, they pardon 2 turkeys every Thanksgiving in case the first turkey can't fulfill his or her duties. I guess there's a runner-up, and those turkeys at the White House pardons are never actually eaten. They're usually sent off to a nice place like a petting zoo at Disney World or the Colonial Farm across the Potomac in Virginia, something like that, where they live out their life in splendor, I think.
Yeah, well, it's an amusing tradition. It always amuses me that each president carries it on with, due seriousness.
Yeah, it is a great tradition, isn't it? But Lincoln was the first one to
I
do
just
it.
led that story that his son bursts into the cabinet meeting. It tells you a lot about the man.
Yeah, Tad did that a lot. Tad had no reservations about bursting in on a meeting whenever he felt like it. Yeah.
Well, thank you. All right, well, that's all for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and